Everybody suffers. Everybody hurts or will hurt. That's the nature of human life, I think. Suffering is not the full story, of course, but it's definitely part of the story of human life. And if that's the case, then trying to understand suffering, that part of us that is always going to be there some way, somehow, well then trying to understand suffering to find some meaning in it should be part of everyone's life, so that we don't suffer blindly or mutely, or we don't just grit our teeth while enduring the buffeting of pain. By the time we get to the end of this video, it's my hope to have offered to you the tiniest beginning to finding meaning in suffering. Stay tuned. If we haven't met, my name is Deacon Richard Hudzik, and I use these videos to hand on the faith. Now, at the outset, a huge disclaimer, and the disclaimer is this, that I can only talk about my pain. I know there are some who, from what I see from my vantage point, they suffer terribly, who suffer in ways that would destroy me. Maybe this video then is for those who, like me, have lived basically a charmed life, an abundant, blessing-filled life, but for whom a little bit of suffering has come along. And as I say, I can't know your suffering the way you do. And I don't intend here to offer some kind of magic or glib formula to make your anguish go away. I have to be respectful in silence about anyone's suffering but my own. But what this video is, hopefully, is to be the first in a series on the meaning of suffering. This question is so big and so difficult that we can't hope to explain suffering fully. Gosh, it's hard even to put words together to ask a significant, meaningful question. But here is one question that can get us started. What does our Catholic faith mean when we talk about such things as redemptive suffering? Redemptive suffering. Let's take some tiny steps forward. The hope is that by proceeding slowly, we'll acquire enough data and strategies to understand this suffering business a little bit better. I'm reminded of the undercurrent of St. John Paul's apostolic letter, Salvifici, doloris. I think that letter would say that suffering is a mystical experience, which means that words fail in rationally explaining suffering. We'll never end up with that 30-second elevator speech on the meaning of suffering, but still, we try to understand. It's important. We make small steps forward. Here's one starting point. Suppose we thought of our suffering, whether it's physical pain, loneliness, frustration, fear, regret, shame, whatever ails us and bedevils us. What if we thought of those experiences as a sacrifice, something that we choose to offer and give away? In doing so, it gives us some measure of control. Maybe this is only the smallest gesture, but even though we don't choose the suffering, we can choose how we deal with it. Indeed, getting whacked by suffering, that illness, that death, that broken relationship, part of the suffering, a big part oftentimes, is the vulnerability to which we are exposed by this onslaught. This lousy stuff comes at me from outside, beyond my control. But if we navigate to have a little bit of autonomy, that might help. I'll acknowledge it is super hard to have that mindset, but it might be one small way forward if it can be managed. So, if I see suffering as a sacrifice, we are saying, Lord, let me give you my suffering. But what does that really mean? I think it means we are accepting the pain, the sorrow, as somehow our own, that this something hurts us indeed, but we give it away. Here, Lord, take my pain. I give it to you, not that it be taken away unless that is your will. Rather, I give you this suffering for you to do with it whatever you want. It is somehow in that way a sacrifice. In the Old Testament, we see that a sacrifice is giving away something that is good, like giving away the first fruits of the season, or the sacrifice giving away the perfect, unblemished animal. In the New Testament, Jesus himself is the sacrifice, the perfect offering, the innocent victim, and he offers himself. So too with us. Now, I'm truly not the unspotted, unblemished, innocent victim. But if I accept my sorrow as somehow mysteriously God's providence, I become purer than I otherwise would be. I accept the suffering as somehow being part of the plan of God. In effect, I say to God, I will receive what you give me, and I give it back to you for the uses you choose in your providence. We'll talk about what those uses might be later on, but for right now, for myself, I can say that accepting suffering teaches me. It puts me in the posture of a prayerful seeking to understand, rather than rail against God and shake my fist. Accepting my suffering and offering it back to God acknowledges my trust in his goodness. I began a study of suffering and sorrow a few years ago. I went down that road because, yes, I am afraid of suffering, but I realized that this suffering is going to happen to me sometime, somehow, in some fashion. And so, yes, it makes sense to think about this and to pray about it, and if it is possible, be a little prepared. Additionally, as I proceeded through my 60s and have now left my 60s, which is impossible, but I think it happened, I realized that my retirement from paid church work was coming. Work that I thoroughly enjoy, but the question presented itself while I struggled with this: why keep working if I don't have to? I am old enough for Social Security and retirement and all that financial stuff. I thought of my work, as beloved as it might be, and realized the psychic energy it called for and how it might be preventing me from spiritual development in a direction I've never had the opportunity for before. At least I've always been busy working, and I never had time for certain things. And I could continue with the working, but why? I thought for a number of years about this, about how my job is a ministry. It's a good thing, I think. It's a service that hopefully serves the church and her people. And as I continued working, while I sorted out retirement or not from my church job, I came to realize that my continued paid work, and it was a suffering. It was willingly endured, joyfully even at times, but it was a suffering that I could make into a sacrifice. It was something I could offer to God. I had to test that notion and pray and think about this business of suffering and sacrifice. Was I being grandiose in what I was offering back to the Lord? Was I hearing the Holy Spirit? Thus, I am on this journey to try to understand suffering. The first step in the journey has been for me to admit that there is some kind of suffering going on in me. This then acknowledges that I have something to give away, to return to God. I think it is at bottom an acknowledgement that, surprise, I cannot control creation. God does. And in his perfect love, my suffering will result in his glory and my redemption. So, my tiny takeaway from all of this, it's to see what happens in one's life as a gift from God, even the bad stuff, and offer that bad stuff as a sacrifice to God. Offer the good stuff as a return of unblemished fruit. Admit that all of your life, blessings and warts, All of it is within the flow of God's plan. Offer all of your life, even the pain, as a holy sacrifice. But join with me in future videos as we think further about this all, and thank you so much for staying to the end. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. God bless.